Welcome the Lord's chosen. When you outgrow the illusion, even the watchers lose your signal. There comes a moment in a chosen one's evolution when you stop being visible, not because you're hiding, but because you've shifted dimensions of awareness. The people who used to read your moods like open books can't even find the first page anymore. The system that once predicted your every move is now buffering, confused, and outdated. It's not spiritual mystery. It's energetic math. Your growth rewired your frequency, and their antennas weren't built to pick up peace this strong. You see, every version of you they tried to track was tied to a wound. They studied your insecurities, not your consciousness. They memorized your triggers, not your transformation. So now that you're healed, detached and glowing like Wi-Fi in another universe, their old coordinates are useless. They're still typing your name into the past while you're busy living in the next timeline. And the funny part? They think you've gone quiet because you're defeated. Meanwhile, you're simply operating on a bandwidth where gossip doesn't reach and validation doesn't exist. Your calm confuses them. Your growth irritates them. Your peace, it's their worst surveillance nightmare. This isn't about arrogance or revenge. It's about frequency exile. You evolved beyond what they could emotionally afford to understand. You didn't disappear. You transcended visibility. And now, no matter how hard they try to track you, they're chasing the ghost of who you used to be. Number one, you outgrew their language. At some point, your vocabulary of the soul changed. You stopped speaking the emotional language that kept you trapped in small conversations, small energies, and small thinking. You no longer respond to manipulation, guilt, or drama, not because you're cold, but because you've finally realized it's a dialect of survival, and you've moved into a language of growth. The people who used to understand you now find you confusing. You're not acting strange. You're just fluent in peace, and they're still arguing in chaos. They used to track you through emotional codes, by how quickly you'd react, defend, or explain yourself. They'd say something sharp just to see if it still pierced you. But now your silence isn't a tactic, it's translation loss. You don't decode their passive aggression anymore because it doesn't register. They throw words that used to sting, and you just blink. Not out of arrogance, but because your spirit literally doesn't recognize that frequency. Growth changes your language subtly. It's not about what you say, it's what you no longer need to say. You've stopped repeating yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You've stopped over-explaining to those who never intended to listen. And you've stopped pleading for empathy from people allergic to accountability. It's a quiet evolution, but it's profound. When you outgrow their language, conversations start to feel like time travel. You're standing in the present, and they're arguing from a chapter you've already healed from. That's why they can't track you anymore. You're not emotionally Googleable. They keep searching for the old version of you, the one that spoke pain fluently. But you've deleted that dictionary. Now your energy speaks simplicity, calm, and truth. And to those still addicted to chaos, that's pure static. They can't translate peace, so they call it distance. They can't translate detachment, so they call it pride. But that's not your problem anymore. You didn't go silent. You became fluent in evolution. Number two, you became unpredictable to predictable minds. They used to know exactly how to get to you, what to say, how to push, and when to pull. You were once a routine, easy to read because your reactions were tied to pain patterns you hadn't yet healed. They studied your sensitivity like a map, thinking they could always find a way back in. But then something shifted. You stopped being predictable because you stopped being programmable. You started thinking before reacting, observing before responding, and that broke their control completely. People who thrive on your old patterns panic when they can't predict your next move. You used to fight, explain, defend, or shut down, and they built their confidence on that cycle. But now, you might respond with calmness when they expect rage, or you might simply walk away without warning. That kind of unpredictability isn't chaos, it's freedom. It's what happens when you stop letting your emotions be remote controlled by those who misunderstand your peace for weakness. Growth made you flexible. Predictable minds don't understand flexibility because they live in repetition. They need you to act the same so they can feel safe in their assumptions. When you stop fitting into their expectations, they lose their sense of power. They start calling you different, distant, or hard to read, because your new level of awareness doesn't fit inside their old definitions. Being unpredictable doesn't mean you're unstable. It means you've become emotionally sovereign. You no longer move from impulse. You move from insight. They can't track that because insight doesn't announce itself. It simply acts. You've become harder to find because you're no longer ruled by the need to be understood, liked, or validated. Your unpredictability isn't rebellion, it's maturity. Predictable people need control to feel relevant. But when your peace becomes your compass, no one can follow your direction unless they've healed enough to walk beside you. That's what truly drives them crazy. Not that you changed, but that you finally stopped being predictable enough to control. Number 3, your peace stopped feeding their power. For a long time, your chaos was their comfort. The more they could provoke you, the more powerful they felt. Your anger, your frustration, your need to explain, all of it was energy they quietly fed on. They didn't need to win the argument, they just needed to see you shaken, because your reaction proved they still had influence over you. That's how control works, not always through dominance, but through emotional extraction. But everything changed when you learned to stay calm in situations that used to break you. Your peace became your firewall. Suddenly, the same tricks stopped working. They'd throw the usual insults, bring up your past, twist your words, and instead of reacting, you'd breathe. That moment of stillness was their unraveling. They couldn't understand how the same buttons no longer triggered the same results. And that's when they realized their power wasn't real. It only existed through your reaction. The truth is, people addicted to control can't survive in the presence of peace. Peace exposes them. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's steady. And in that stillness, they see their own chaos reflected back at them. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding their narrative. They start losing access, not because you blocked them, but because you stopped being emotionally available for their games. This isn't passive behavior, it's self-mastery. You finally understood that not every attack deserves a counterattack. You learned that silence can end wars, that arguments keep alive. Your calm isn't weakness, it's the sound of reclaimed energy. And the irony? The more peaceful you become, the louder their frustration grows. They start to spiral, looking for new ways to pull you back into emotional debt. But they can't. You've become too centered to fund their dysfunction. Your peace starved their power source, and now they're left with an empty plate where your energy used to be. That's when you truly win. Not by fighting back, but by no longer being food for their chaos. Number 4, you shifted from proving to being. There was a time when you lived like your worth was on trial. Every move, every achievement, every sentence was evidence. Not for your peace, but for other people's approval. You worked to be seen, explained to be understood, and tried to prove your heart in rooms that had already made up their minds about you. But growth teaches you something that performance never will. The truth doesn't need an audience, it just needs embodiment. You stopped performing because you finally realized that the people who demand proof will never accept it. Their vision was never meant to recognize authenticity. It was trained to seek validation, not truth. When you began living from your center instead of your insecurity, you stopped existing in their line of sight. They can't monitor authenticity because authenticity doesn't broadcast. It's not a show, it's a frequency. And those who rely on illusion simply don't have the equipment to detect it. This shift is quiet but seismic. You no longer post, speak, or move to convince anyone. You move because you're aligned, not because you're being watched. You don't need to over-explain your silence or justify your distance. You've outgrown the obsession with proving your intentions. Now your existence itself is proof. That's what freedom looks like when you've stopped performing for people who can only recognize confidence when it's loud. The irony is, the moment you stopped trying to be understood was the moment you became untouchable. You disappeared from their emotional tracking systems because you no longer orbit around their perception. Your validation now comes from clarity, not applause. And that's what unsettles them most. They can't use misunderstanding to control you anymore. You've moved from proving your worth to simply living it. You're not performing identity, you're embodying truth. And truth, when fully lived, becomes invisible to those who survive on illusion. Number 5. You became spiritually asymmetric. The people who once had power over you built their strategies around your old wounds. They knew exactly where to aim: your need to be loved, your fear of rejection, your habit of overgiving, your hunger to be understood. They designed their approach around those openings, thinking they'd always exist. But the moment you started healing, the battlefield shifted. What they were prepared for no longer exists. Their weapons still look sharp, but they no longer fit the shape of who you've become. You've become spiritually asymmetric, unbalanced in their favor no more. Growth changed your angles. The pain that used to make you predictable has turned into awareness that makes you unreadable. You now understand that not every attack deserves defense, not every accusation deserves explanation, and not every silence is guilt. You've stopped fighting on their terms, and that alone disarms them. They're still swinging in old directions, but you've outgrown the coordinates. Healing does something powerful. It changes your texture. You're no longer emotionally porous. Their projections used to stick to you because you doubted yourself. Now truth has hardened your self-respect. Insults slide off. Manipulation sounds like static. And guilt trips don't even make it past your border. You didn't become colder. You just became spiritually aerodynamic. Nothing false can cling to you anymore. The beauty of asymmetry is that it makes you unmatchable. They're still trying to engage with a version of you that's already dissolved. Every move they make is outdated the moment it's made. They don't understand why their pressure no longer works, but it's simple. You're no longer at their level of vibration. Your healing broke their equilibrium. They relied on your pain to keep balance. And now that you've turned it into power, their tactics fall flat. You don't resist anymore. You transcend. And in that transcendence, every old weapon aimed at you loses its gravity. Number 6. You started operating from inner data. You used to make decisions based on noise, what people said, what they expected, what looked safe. You used to measure your worth through outside signals, constantly scanning for approval, direction, or reassurance. That made you predictable because your actions could be traced back to someone else's opinion. But once you began tuning into your own intuition, everything changed. You stopped moving from reaction and started moving from revelation. Now, your guidance doesn't come from trends, emotions, or other people's timelines. It comes from your spirit. That's what makes you unreadable. They depend on your external movements, but you've gone inward. You've learned to pause before responding, to wait before deciding, and to let energy settle before you act. That patience drives them crazy because it strips them of control. They can't manipulate someone who no longer moves on command. Operating from inner data means you trust your internal signals more than anyone's narrative. You sense things before they're said. You understand shifts before they're visible. And you act in alignment with something that doesn't need validation. That's why people can't predict you anymore. Your choices aren't emotional impulses. They're spiritual calculations. To them, you look detached or mysterious. But in truth, you've just stopped broadcasting your process. When you live from inner knowing, you stop chasing explanations. You don't need to justify your peace or decode your intuition for others to feel comfortable. You just move, cleanly, quietly, and confidently. They can't trace that. They can't predict when you'll act or how, because your signal doesn't transmit through fear or approval seeking anymore. It unsettles people who rely on your openness to feel in control. You've become a closed circuit. Energy flows within you, not out for public consumption. They used to track your patterns by your noise, but now you operate on stillness. And stillness to the uncentered is the most confusing movement of all. Number 7, you disconnected from their frequency of guilt. For years, guilt was the leash that kept you tied to people who drained you. They knew how to pull it, a subtle tone, a disappointed sigh, a reminder of what you owe. You'd feel the sting and immediately shrink, apologizing for things that weren't even your fault. They didn't need force. They just needed you to feel bad enough to obey. That's how emotional control works, not through power, but through permission disguised as morality. But then you woke up. You began to see that guilt was never proof of wrongdoing. It was often just proof that you cared too much about everyone's comfort, except your own. You realized that your empathy had been weaponized, turned into a tracking system that kept you explaining yourself to people who had no intention of understanding you. So you unplugged. You stopped speaking guilt's language, and everything changed. Now, when they try to bait you with shame by saying you've changed, abandoned them, or become cold, it no longer hits. You hear the words, but the frequency doesn't register. You're no longer tuned into the emotional manipulation that used to make you doubt your own goodness. They say, you don't care anymore, but that's not true. You just stop confusing boundaries with betrayal. You stop thinking love meant self-erasure. The moment you deleted guilt as a language, you became untraceable to manipulators. Their tactics depend on your emotional response, and now that response is gone. You're not defensive, you're not angry. You're just done explaining peace to people who benefit from your chaos. Freedom starts when guilt ends. Not the kind of guilt that comes from conscience, but the kind that's planted to keep you small. Once you let that go, their whole dissolves. They can't track what they can't guilt trip, and they can't control someone who finally learned that no is not a sin. Number 8, you mastered emotional stealth. You used to be easy to find because your emotions were loud. When something hurt, everyone knew. When someone disrespected you, you reacted instantly. Your heart was on display, and your energy was open terrain for anyone who wanted access. People learned your rhythms, your triggers, your moods. They studied you not out of love, but out of curiosity, to know how to pull your strings. But that version of you is gone. Now you've learned the art of emotional stealth, the ability to move with power that doesn't need performance. Your calm became your camouflage. You don't announce your moves, you don't post your healing process, and you don't let people predict your next step through emotional breadcrumbs. You've become the kind of quiet that confuses people who depend on your chaos to feel alive. They look for you in the same noise they used to find you in, but you're no longer there. You're moving in stillness, and to them, stillness feels like disappearance. Mastering emotional stealth doesn't mean you suppress what you feel. It means you've learned how to direct it. You no longer let emotions lead you into battles that don't serve your growth. You've learned that peace isn't passive, it's the most strategic state there is. When others expect a reaction, you choose reflection. When they expect drama, you choose silence. That unpredictability isn't avoidance, it's precision. The people who thrived on your openness now feel blocked. They can't decode your tone, can't predict your choices, and can't use your emotions as maps to manipulate you. You became unreadable because you finally understood that transparency isn't always strength. Sometimes it's exposure. Now your emotions serve you, not the environment. You move quietly, powerfully, and intentionally. The noise of others can't locate someone who's found peace in invisibility. You don't hide. You simply refuse to broadcast your soul to those who haven't earned the frequency to hear it. Number 9. You broke the mirror. They used to define you. There was a time when people used you as their mirror, not to see truth, but to confirm illusion. They needed your reactions to feel powerful, your insecurities to feel confident, and your confusion to feel wise. Your pain was their proof that they were winning. As long as you flinched, doubted yourself, or tried to please them, they could tell themselves they mattered more. That's why they pushed buttons they knew would hurt. Your response gave their ego reflection. But growth has a way of breaking mirrors. The day you stopped reacting, they lost their favorite source of validation. You didn't do it to prove a point. You simply stopped living on emotional demand. They'd throw the same insults, the same silent treatments, the same guilt traps, and you'd just stare back with peace in your eyes. That silence wasn't empty. It was the sound of a mirror shattering. You no longer exist to confirm anyone's delusions about who they are. They can't stand that you're no longer a reflection of their control. Your calm exposes the emptiness behind their arrogance. The superiority they flaunted depended on your pain to look tall. Without your reaction, their image collapses. They don't know who they are without someone to look down on. That's the secret. Some people don't want connection, they want contrast. They define themselves by what they can dominate. When you healed, you stopped participating in that dynamic. You didn't just walk away, you removed their reflection entirely. That's why they talk about you so much now. They're trying to rebuild their identity through gossip because they can't find themselves without your energy to oppose. Breaking that mirror wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration. You stopped being the backdrop for someone else's insecurities. Now, you're not a reflection, you're your own light. And those who once defined themselves through your pain are left staring at their own unfiltered truth. Number 10, you became a quantum mismatch. Your growth took you out of emotional physics. You no longer operate on the same energetic equations that used to define your relationships. You've evolved into a version of yourself that doesn't respond to control, guilt, or approval seeking. And that shift alone makes you incompatible with the people who still live by those rules. They can't connect to you anymore, not because you're distant, but because your vibration no longer supports their intentions. You've become a quantum mismatch, a frequency they can't decode or contain. Every attempt to judge you, label you, or pull you back into old roles collapses the moment it's made. They try to observe you the way they used to, by studying your behavior, your silence, your decisions. But you've changed dimensions of awareness. You're not playing on the same emotional plane, so their observations yield no results. They're trying to measure light with a ruler. The tools they use can't comprehend the kind of energy you've stepped into. When you grow spiritually, you stop being readable to those who live in reaction. They expect you to defend yourself, explain your peace, or justify your transformation. But you don't. Your clarity is internal now, and that's what makes you ungraspable. The more they try to analyze you, the more confused they become, because analysis requires sameness, and you've outgrown similarity. Being a quantum mismatch means you no longer meet people at their frequency out of obligation. You meet them only in resonance. That's why certain connections suddenly feel heavy or distorted. Not because you're superior, but because your spirit can't shrink to fit what it's already healed from. And that's what drives them mad. Your energy used to be accessible, predictable, readable. Now it's light, free, fast, uncontainable. They keep trying to box you in, but every time they reach for you, they grab air. You no longer exist in their control field. You're beyond measurement. Not louder, just lighter. Number 11. You chose destiny over drama. There comes a turning point where peace stops feeling boring and drama starts feeling expensive. You reach that point. You realize that every argument, every emotional tug of war, every attempt to prove your worth was costing you something far greater. Time, focus, alignment. So you made the decision that most people never do. You chose destiny over drama. And from that moment, the energy that used to pull you into chaos no longer had power. They can't track you anymore because your motivation changed. You're not fueled by attention, validation, or applause. You're powered by purpose. That makes you unreadable to people who only understand control through conflict. They expect you to take the bait, to explain yourself, to re-enter old storylines. But you've grown past needing to be right. You'd rather protect your peace than prove your point. That's evolution they can't comprehend. Purpose makes you move differently. You don't chase after what distracts you. You walk toward what builds you. You don't argue to win. You listen to learn. You no longer crave being seen. You crave being aligned. That's what confuses them. You used to dance to their rhythm, but now your steps are guided by something invisible, something sacred. They can't locate you because they're looking for noise, and you've become direction. Choosing destiny means understanding that not every battle deserves your fire. Some things are meant to be left unanswered, not because you're afraid, but because you've outgrown the need for reaction. You've become too focused on where you're going to be distracted by where you've been. And to those still addicted to chaos, your peace feels threatening. They call you detached, arrogant, or distant, but really, you're just unavailable to anything that doesn't match your mission. They're still performing for attention while you're walking quietly toward fulfillment. Purpose doesn't broadcast, it builds, and that's why they can't track you. Destiny doesn't exist on their radar. Number 12. You turned pain into pattern recognition. Pain used to catch you off guard. You'd walk straight into situations that drained you, convinced this time would be different. You'd explain, defend, and hope people would change, only to find yourself repeating the same emotional cycle. But all that heartbreak, disappointment, and betrayal wasn't wasted. It became data. Every time you were hurt, you learned a code. Every time someone lied, you learned a pattern. Over time, that pain turned into perception. Now you don't need proof to recognize energy. You can see intention long before it's spoken. They think you've become cold or detached, but you've simply become discerning. You no longer wait for damage to confirm what your intuition already knows. You spot the red flags before they even unfold, because pain has trained your eyes to see subtle movements, tone shifts, delayed truths, the kind of silence that isn't peace, but preparation. That's not paranoia. That's wisdom earned through experience. You've learned that silence isn't weakness, it's surveillance. You don't react immediately anymore because you're observing patterns, not words. You watch how people behave when they think you're not paying attention. You let them reveal themselves before you decide where to place your energy. That calm exterior confuses those who depend on chaos to maintain control. They're used to your emotional availability, not your emotional intelligence. The beauty of turning pain into pattern recognition is that you no longer carry bitterness, you carry awareness. You're not out for revenge, you're just unavailable for repetition. The same tricks that once worked can't touch you now because you've mapped their entire system. You're 2 moves ahead, not because you're calculating, but because you finally understand the game. They call it distance, but it's actually discipline. You're not avoiding connection, you're filtering it. You've learned that not everyone deserves front-row access to your peace. Your silence isn't submission, it's strategy. And strategy born from pain becomes one of the purest forms of power. Number 13. You became the ghost in their system. They tried to decode you like a system, observing your behavior, tracking your habits, memorizing your responses. For a long time it worked. You were emotionally transparent, predictable, and easy to read. You wore your intentions on your sleeve because you believed authenticity meant exposure. But then life happened. Growth reprogrammed you. Experience rewrote your operating system. Now, every version of you they think they know is a relic of an old design. You've become a ghost in their system. They're still using the same outdated emotional software to understand you, but you've evolved past their framework. They keep searching for the same triggers, expecting the same responses and waiting for reactions that no longer exist. They send signals, but nothing pings back. You're still visible, but you're no longer accessible. Your energy used to be an open network. Now it's encrypted with discernment. They don't understand that your silence isn't emptiness. It's an upgrade in progress. When you outgrow emotional patterns, the people who benefited from your old identity can't keep up. They try to study your movements, but your moves are no longer logical. They're intuitive. You don't operate on predictable timelines or emotional scripts. You act from alignment, and that kind of movement can't be monitored. You became untraceable, not by hiding, but by healing. Healing removes the signals that chaos once recognized. They call you detached, mysterious, or unpredictable. But really, you've just stopped broadcasting pain. You've gone offline from their frequency. They can't log into your life the way they used to because the password has changed. It's peace now. Becoming a ghost in their system doesn't mean you vanished. It means you finally stopped running on programs that weren't yours. You're still here, but on a higher bandwidth. They can study your old data all they want, but it won't matter. That version of you no longer exists. You didn't disappear, you transcended. Number 14. You remembered you were never meant to be found. There was a time when you thought isolation meant something was wrong with you, that your distance, your silence, your separation from certain people or circles was punishment. You tried to reconnect, to explain, to be seen again by those who once recognized you. But the truth is, you were never lost. You were never hiding. You were ascending. And ascension doesn't look like being found. It looks like outgrowing visibility. You've outpaced their reality, and that's why they can't track you. You're not walking the same timeline anymore. The conversations that once mattered now feel like static. The people who used to define your worth no longer appear in your story. You didn't leave them behind to prove a point. Your evolution simply changed your direction. You moved from validation to vibration, and they can't follow because they're still anchored in the noise you've already transcended. When you rise in consciousness, it's not about superiority, it's about frequency alignment. You don't reject people. You release versions of yourself that no longer resonate with theirs. They can't reach you, not because you built walls, but because you dissolved the roads that led to your old self. You no longer orbit around old identities, old fears, or old expectations. You've become a different equation entirely. It confuses them because they still search for you in memories, in behaviors, in the personality that once made sense to them. But you're not there. You became the evolved echo of your own becoming. What they call distance is actually divine redirection, a quiet relocation of your energy into higher ground. You were never meant to be found in their story because you were never written to stay there. You were meant to transcend the map altogether. So let them keep searching for the version of you that existed before awakening. They'll never find you, not because you're lost, but because you finally remembered who you are. Conclusion. Your growth isn't just personal, it's seismic. Every step you've taken, every boundary you've enforced, every layer of healing you've embraced has made you untouchable to those who once thought they understood you. You've outgrown their language, broken their mirrors, and deleted the emotional breadcrumbs they used to follow. You've stopped performing for approval and started moving from inner knowing. You became unpredictable, untraceable, and unapologetically aligned with your destiny. What once pierced you now passes through harmlessly because you've turned pain into pattern recognition, silence into strategy, and peace into power. They can't measure your vibration. They can't anticipate your moves. They can't access the frequency that drives your decisions or the alignment that fuels your life. And the most extraordinary truth? You weren't hiding all this time. You were ascending. Every moment of growth has placed you on a timeline they can't reach, a dimension they can't navigate, and a life they can't comprehend. Your evolution isn't just resistance, it's revelation. Your existence alone proves that some people can't track what was never meant to be confined to their understanding. So stand in your power, honor your growth, and let the world adjust to the force of your transformation. You are living proof that when you stop performing for others, you begin performing for your destiny. You are the signal they'll never decode, the energy they'll never capture, and the peace they'll never steal. If this message resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more insights that challenge, awaken, and elevate your mind. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and share it with anyone who needs to remember their power. Your growth is contagious. Let it inspire others to rise too. Stay blessed always.